Maybe it's time you stopped acting like this is still your home, my daughter-in-law said quietly as she cleared the dinner plates. My son didn't look up. He just kept eating like he hadn't heard a thing. I folded my napkin slowly and placed it beside my untouched mashed potatoes. Then I smiled, stood up, and carried my teacup to the sink without saying a word. The next morning, I called my husband's lawyer. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The house had felt different ever since Daniel died. Not empty exactly. Empty would have meant there was still space left for grief. This felt colder than grief. Like the walls themselves had quietly decided I no longer belonged there. The dining room used to be my favorite place in the house. Daniel had built the long oak table with his own hands 30 years earlier, sanding every edge in our garage, while music from an old Frank Sinatra record drifted through the open windows. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every Sunday roast had happened around that table. Now the room felt staged. Too clean. Too controlled. Vanessa liked everything modern and colorless. 2 months after Daniel's funeral, she replaced my cream curtains with stiff gray panels that blocked the afternoon sun. The old floral centerpiece disappeared. So did the family photos that used to sit on the buffet cabinet. In their place sat scented candles that smelled like eucalyptus and something sharp I couldn't identify. Nothing in that room looked like me anymore. I stood at the sink rinsing my teacup while Michael scrolled through his phone behind me. Vanessa stacked dishes beside him with short, clipped movements. Neither of them offered to help me the way they used to when Daniel was alive. Or maybe they had never really wanted to help me at all. Don't forget we're meeting the realtor on Friday, Vanessa said casually. I froze for half a second before placing the cup carefully onto the drying rack. Realtor? Michael cleared his throat. We'll talk about it later. Vanessa shrugged. There's nothing to hide. I turned around slowly. A realtor? Oh. Vanessa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Just exploring options. This house is a lot to maintain. This house. Not your house, Evelyn. Not the home Daniel and I spent 40 years paying off together. Just this house. Michael finally looked at me then, though only briefly. Vanessa's worried about you being alone here. Alone. I almost laughed at the irony of that word. I wasn't alone until they started treating me like a visitor in my own kitchen. I've managed just fine so far, I said softly. Vanessa crossed her arms. For now. The silence after that felt heavy enough to crack glass. I dried my hands carefully on a dish towel embroidered with tiny blue flowers. My mother had sewn it for me decades ago. Vanessa hated those towels. Said they looked outdated. Daniel loved them. I suddenly realized I was clutching the fabric too tightly. I think I'm going upstairs, I said. Neither of them stopped me. As I climbed the staircase, I noticed something else missing. The framed photo from Michael's college graduation. It had always hung near the landing beside Daniel's Navy service portrait. Now only Daniel's portrait remained. I stared at the empty spot on the wall for several seconds. Little things had been disappearing for weeks. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Grief can make ordinary changes feel enormous. That's what people say anyway. But now I wasn't so sure. 3 weeks earlier, I'd opened the hall closet and found all my winter coats moved to the back behind Vanessa's yoga equipment. The week before that, the Wi-Fi password suddenly stopped working on my laptop. Oh, Michael changed it, Vanessa had said lightly. I forgot to tell you. Forgot. Then there was the Thanksgiving planning board hanging near the pantry. Every year since Michael was 10 years old, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner. Even after he married Vanessa, everyone still came here. My sweet potato casserole, Daniel carving the turkey, football playing too loudly in the den. Last Tuesday, I walked into the kitchen and saw the board already filled out in Vanessa's neat handwriting. Turkey, Vanessa desserts, Vanessa's sister wine, Michael games for kids, Vanessa my name. Wasn't anywhere. Not even beside napkins. I stood there staring at the board so long Vanessa eventually looked up from her phone. Oh, she said casually. We thought it might be easier if I hosted this year. We. Such a small word. Such a cruel one. That night I sat alone in my bedroom, turning Daniel's wedding ring between my fingers. The room still smelled faintly like his cedar aftershave. His reading glasses remained on the nightstand exactly where he left them the morning before his heart attack. Some nights I could still hear his footsteps in the hallway if the house was quiet enough. I missed him most in the ordinary moments. Morning coffee, folding laundry together, his hand brushing against mine while we watched television, 42 years of marriage doesn't disappear quietly. It lingers in the walls, in the carpet fibers, in the silence between midnight and dawn. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Michael stepped into the doorway. For one hopeful second, I saw the little boy he used to be. The child who crawled into our bed after thunderstorms. The teenager who once told me no one made grilled cheese sandwiches like I did. But that softness disappeared almost immediately. "You okay, Mom?" "Mom." At least he still called me that. "I'm fine," I answered. He nodded awkwardly, hands shoved into his pockets. Vanessa doesn't mean anything by her comments. She's just stressed. I studied my son carefully. "When did she stop liking me, Michael?" His eyes shifted away. "That's not fair." I didn't ask if it was fair. He sighed quietly. "Things are changing." Changing. Another harmless little word people use before they take something from you. I looked past him toward the dark hallway. "When your father was alive," I said slowly, "this house never felt cold." Michael's jaw tightened. "Dad isn't here anymore." No, he wasn't. And suddenly, for the first time since the funeral, I understood something terrifying. Daniel hadn't been the only thing holding this family together. He had been protecting me from seeing what it truly was. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise out of habit. Daniel had always been an early riser. Even after retirement, he'd still shuffle downstairs at 6 in the morning wearing those old gray slippers with the worn-out soles, muttering about coffee like it was oxygen. For 42 years, my mornings began with the sound of him moving around the kitchen. Now they began with silence. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, staring at the pale blue light slipping through the curtains. The house felt unusually still. Not peaceful, just watchful somehow, like I was living inside someone else's routine. I reached for my robe and slowly made my way downstairs. The hardwood creaked beneath my feet. Daniel used to joke that the stairs announced me before I even entered a room. He always knew it was me by the third step. Funny the things grief remembers. When I entered the kitchen, I stopped cold. The coffee maker was gone. Not broken. Not moved to another counter. Gone. In its place sat one of those sleek silver espresso machines Vanessa liked. The kind with glowing buttons and tiny cups that looked more decorative than useful. I opened 2 cabinets before realizing my favorite coffee mugs were missing too. The blue ceramic mug Daniel bought me during our trip to Vermont. The white one with the chipped handle. Even the sunflower mug Michael painted for me in 2nd grade. All gone. I stood there with the cabinet door hanging open, trying to steady the strange ache rising in my chest. It wasn't about the mugs. People who've never lived through this kind of thing never understand that. It's never about the objects. It's about the quiet message hidden inside their disappearance. You no longer belong here. I finally found one plain gray mug shoved behind a stack of plates. Vanessa's style. Minimal. Cold. Expensive looking. I poured coffee into it anyway. The espresso tasted bitter. I was sitting alone at the kitchen island when Vanessa walked in wearing cream-colored workout clothes and holding her phone. "Oh," she said, sounding mildly surprised to see me there. Not warm. Not rude either. Just inconvenienced. "Morning," I said softly. She nodded and opened the refrigerator. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I watched her move around the kitchen comfortably, confidently, like someone arranging furniture in a hotel suite she already planned to own permanently. Then she glanced toward the dining room. "I think we should repaint in there." I wrapped both hands around the mug. Repaint. The beige makes the room look dated. That room had been beige since 1998. Daniel and I picked the color together after repainting the entire downstairs ourselves one summer during a heat wave. I still remembered him standing on a ladder with paint on his nose making me laugh, so hard I nearly spilled an entire tray of rollers. But Vanessa said it the same way someone comments on weather. Casual. Detached. Like history meant nothing. "I like the color," I replied. She gave a small shrug. "Well, tastes change." Another one of those harmless little sentences that somehow felt sharp enough to cut skin. A few minutes later, Michael came downstairs adjusting his tie. He barely glanced at me before kissing Vanessa on the cheek. "We still on for Friday?" she asked him. "Yeah. Friday again. That realtor." I lowered my eyes to my coffee. Michael finally noticed the tension in the room. "Mom, you doing okay this morning?" I almost smiled at how rehearsed it sounded. Like checking a box. "She's fine," Vanessa answered before I could speak. Something about that unsettled me more than I expected. Not because she answered, because Michael let her. He opened the fridge, grabbed orange juice, and leaned against the counter scrolling through emails while Vanessa discussed paint colors. Neither of them asked whether I wanted breakfast. Not intentionally cruel. That was the worst part. Cruelty would have been easier to recognize. This was slower than cruelty. This was erasure. I finished my coffee quietly and carried the mug to the sink. As I rinsed it, I noticed something taped beside the refrigerator calendar. A guest list. Thanksgiving. Names written neatly in Vanessa's handwriting. Her parents. Her sister and brother-in-law. Neighbors. Friends from Michael's office. Even little Emma's piano teacher. But not mine. Not Grace. Not a single person connected to my side of the family. My stomach tightened slightly. Daniel used to insist Thanksgiving was for everybody. Empty chairs upset him. He invited people constantly. Veterans from church. Widowers. Neighbors who had nowhere else to go. Family should expand the table, he always said. Vanessa believed the opposite. Family, to her, seemed to mean ownership, control, carefully selected access. I stared at the list long enough for Vanessa to notice. Oh, she said lightly. We're trying something smaller this year. Smaller? There were 23 names on the page. I looked at her quietly. She smiled without warmth. Less chaos. I nodded once. Then I went upstairs before my face betrayed me. Inside my bedroom, I closed the door gently and sat beside Daniel's old dresser. The room suddenly felt like the only remaining corner of the house where I still existed. Everything else was slowly being rewritten around me. I opened the top drawer and pulled out an old photo album. Daniel at 32 holding baby Michael in the backyard. Michael missing his 2 front teeth. Christmas mornings. Camping trips. Birthday cakes. Normal life. Good life. I ran my fingers across one photograph from 20 years ago. Vanessa stood beside Michael smiling brightly at their engagement dinner. Her arm looped through mine. Back then, she used to call me constantly. Ask for recipes. Bring me flowers on Mother's Day. Tell people she was lucky to marry into such a warm family. Sometimes I wonder if manipulative people change over time, or if they simply stop pretending once they feel secure enough. A soft laugh drifted upstairs from the kitchen below. Vanessa's laugh. Then Michael's. I sat perfectly still. There was a time hearing my son laugh made me happy instantly. Now it made me feel oddly distant, like I was listening to strangers through the wall of a hotel room. I closed the album carefully. That was when I noticed the envelope, tucked beneath Daniel's old watch box. Cream-colored. My name written across the front in Daniel's handwriting. Evelyn. My pulse quickened slightly. I didn't remember seeing it before. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Then slowly, very slowly, I opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Only one sentence. If at any point you begin to feel unwelcome in your own home, call Thomas. Read immediately. Don't argue. Don't warn anyone. Just call him. I read the sentence 3 times. Then I looked toward the bedroom door. Downstairs, I could still hear Vanessa moving around the kitchen. Comfortable. Certain. Like the future already belonged to her. And for the very first time since Daniel died, I began to wonder what my husband had known before the rest of us did. I didn't call Thomas Reed that day. Not because I didn't trust Daniel. I trusted my husband more than anyone I'd ever known. But part of me still hoped I was misunderstanding everything. After 42 years of marriage, your mind doesn't easily accept the possibility that the family you built might quietly continue without you. Especially not your own son. So I folded Daniel's note carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Then I placed it inside the drawer beneath my sweaters like it was something fragile or dangerous. The rest of the afternoon passed strangely. I could hear Vanessa downstairs moving furniture again. Cabinet doors opening and closing. Music playing softly from her phone. At one point, I stepped into the hallway and noticed she'd replaced the framed family photos near the staircase. Not all of them. Just mine. The photo of Daniel and me dancing at Michael's wedding was gone. So was the portrait from our 40th anniversary dinner. In their place stood newer photos. Vanessa and Michael in Napa Valley. Vanessa holding Emma beside a Christmas tree. Vanessa's parents smiling on a cruise ship. I stood there for several seconds staring at the wall. Then I quietly returned to my room. That evening, rain tapped softly against the windows while I folded laundry alone upstairs. Daniel used to help me fold towels. Badly. He never matched corners correctly, and I used to tease him about it. You married me for my folding skills, he'd joke. Funny how the smallest memories survive the longest. I was placing towels into the linen closet when I heard footsteps downstairs followed by voices. Vanessa's voice first. Then another woman's. Her sister, probably. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I truly wasn't. But then I heard my name. So I stopped moving. She still hasn't. Called him? The other woman asked quietly. Vanessa sighed. No. Honestly, I thought she'd panic by now. My hands tightened around the towel. She's old, Vanessa. Maybe she doesn't realize what's happening. A pause. Then Vanessa laughed softly. Oh, Evelyn notices everything. She's just pretending not to. Something cold settled into my stomach. I stepped closer to the hallway without making noise. What if she refuses? Her sister asked. She won't. Vanessa sounded completely certain. Michael will handle it. Handle it. I suddenly felt embarrassed standing there listening like a stranger in my own home. But I couldn't walk away either. What about the trust? Her sister whispered. There was a brief silence. Then Vanessa lowered her voice too much for me to hear clearly. I only caught fragments. Once the paperwork. After Thanksgiving, better financially. My heartbeat began pounding hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. Trust? Paperwork? Financially better for who? I stepped backward carefully before the floorboards could betray me. Then I returned to my bedroom and shut the door. Only once the lock clicked did I realize my hands were shaking. Not dramatically, just slightly, like my body understood something before my mind was willing to. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the rain outside. Michael will handle it. I kept hearing those words over and over. When Michael was 7 years old, he cried for an hour after accidentally stepping on a bird's wing in our backyard. Daniel had to carry him inside because he was so upset. That little boy used to sleep with stuffed animals lined across his bed because he worried they'd feel abandoned otherwise. Now his wife spoke about me like I was paperwork. And somehow that hurt more than Vanessa's behavior ever could. Because strangers can only wound you from the outside. Family knows exactly where to press. Later that night, I went downstairs for water after everyone had gone to bed. The house was dark except for the small light above the stove. I moved slowly through the kitchen, and that was when I noticed the folder. Thin, black, left partially open on the counter. I should have walked away. Instead, I stopped. Inside were printed documents, property estimates, real estate market reports, photos of retirement communities. One brochure showed smiling elderly couples playing cards beneath the words, Luxury Senior Living Designed for Comfort and Ease. My throat tightened. I flipped another page. Evaluation of this house. My house. Daniel's house. The home where Michael took his first steps. The kitchen where I spent years packing school lunches at 6 in the morning. The backyard where Daniel taught Emma how to ride a bicycle. Reduced to numbers on paper. A floorboard creaked upstairs. I quickly closed the folder. Seconds later, Vanessa appeared at the top of the staircase wearing a silk robe. For a brief moment, we simply stared at each other. Neither of us spoke. Then her eyes shifted toward the folder. She knew, and I knew she knew. But her expression changed almost instantly into something smooth and pleasant. You're still awake? She asked lightly. I wanted water. She descended the stairs slowly. You should really try sleeping more. Stress isn't good at your age. At your age? There it was again. Not concern. Positioning. A reminder that I was becoming inconvenient. I picked up my glass carefully. What's all this? I asked calmly, glancing toward the folder. Vanessa didn't hesitate. Oh, Michael and I have been discussing future options. Future options. Such clean words for something ugly. For who? She smiled faintly. For everyone. I looked directly at her then. Really looked. Beautiful hair. Perfect posture. Expensive skincare. Controlled expressions. Vanessa always reminded me of those luxury hotel lobbies designed to look welcoming while making sure nobody stayed too long. I see, I said quietly. She tilted her head slightly. You know, Evelyn, houses this size become difficult eventually. Eventually. Another soft word hiding sharp intentions. I took a sip of water. Daniel built this house for family. Vanessa's smile barely moved. And families evolve. There was something chilling about how calmly she said it. Not emotional. Not angry. Just practical. Like replacing furniture. For the first time since Daniel died, I felt something besides grief begin rising inside me. Not rage. Something colder. Awareness. Vanessa touched the folder casually. We only want what's best for you. I nodded slowly. Then I said the one thing she probably didn't expect. I'm sure you do. And I walked upstairs before she could study my face long enough to see the truth. Because at that moment, for the first time, I finally understood that Daniel's note had not been a precaution. It had been a warning. The next morning, I called Thomas Reed. I waited until Michael and Vanessa left for work first. Not because I was afraid of them, because after what I'd overheard the night before, I suddenly understood something important. Daniel had wanted me to move quietly. No arguments. No accusations. No warnings. Just action. The house felt unusually hollow after they left. Their car disappeared down the driveway at exactly 8:12 a.m., and for several seconds I stood behind the living room curtains watching the empty street. Then I locked the front door. Not out of fear. Out of instinct. I made myself a cup of coffee using the bitter espresso machine Vanessa loved so much. Even the sound it made annoyed me now. Sharp. Mechanical. Nothing warm about it. Daniel used to grind coffee beans every morning while humming old jazz songs under his breath. This machine sounded like a dental drill. I carried my mug into the den and sat in Daniel's leather chair. The chair still smelled faintly like cedarwood and aftershave. I rested my fingers along the worn armrest where his hand used to sit during football games. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the number written on the note. Thomas answered on the second ring. Thomas Reed. For a second, hearing his voice almost made me cry. Not because of sadness, because it sounded familiar. Steady. From the old version of my life. It's Evelyn Carter. A pause. Then his voice softened immediately. Evelyn. He already knew. I could hear it. Daniel told me to call you if... I stopped for a moment, trying to steady myself. If things began feeling wrong in the house. Silence. Not awkward silence. The kind people leave when they already understand more than you've said. Finally, Thomas spoke carefully. Can you come to my office today? My grip tightened slightly around the mug. Is something wrong? Another pause. Evelyn, he said gently. I think it would be better if we spoke in person. By noon I was driving downtown through cold November rain. The city looked washed out and gray. Trees bent under the wind, while pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas carrying coffees and briefcases. Everything moved normally. Funny how the world keeps functioning while your personal life quietly collapses. Thomas's office sat inside an old brick building Daniel had always liked. He used to joke that the place smelled like cigars and expensive mistakes. When I entered the lobby, the receptionist recognized me immediately. Mrs. Carter, she said softly. Mr. Reed is waiting for you. The way she looked at me made my stomach tighten. Not pity exactly. Concern. Thomas stood when I entered his office. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner too. His silver hair had almost completely turned white. But his eyes were sharp. Lawyer eyes. The kind that notice what people try to hide. He came around the desk and hugged me gently. I'm sorry it came to this. That sentence settled heavily inside my chest. Came to what? I sat down slowly while he closed the office door. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Thomas opened a file folder. Before Daniel passed, he began carefully. He updated several legal protections regarding the house and estate. I frowned slightly. Protections? Thomas nodded. He was worried. A strange feeling moved through me then. Not surprise. Recognition. Like pieces of a puzzle quietly sliding into place. Worried about what? Thomas leaned back in his chair. About what might happen to you after he was gone. The room suddenly felt colder. I looked down at my hands. Daniel never spoke badly about Michael. Never once. Even during disagreements, he defended our son constantly. So hearing this now felt deeply unsettling. Thomas opened another document. About 8 months before his heart attack, Daniel came to me privately. He wanted to place the house into an irrevocable family trust. I stared at him blankly. A trust? Yes. I blinked slowly, trying to process the words. But Michael said the house automatically becomes his eventually. Thomas's expression changed slightly. Eventually is not the same as immediately. Something inside me tightened. Thomas slid a document across the desk. The trust guarantees you lifetime residential rights. Legally, no one can remove you from that home. No one can pressure you into assisted living. And no sale can happen while you're alive unless you personally approve it willingly. I looked at the papers without fully seeing them. Vanessa's folder. The realtor. The retirement brochures. My chest suddenly felt heavy. They're trying to sell the house. I whispered. Thomas didn't answer immediately. That silence told me enough. I closed my eyes briefly. When did Daniel know? I asked quietly. Thomas sighed. He noticed changes. What kind of changes? He hesitated carefully. Then he chose his words like someone stepping around broken glass. He noticed Vanessa becoming unusually interested in financial matters, property values, ownership timelines. He also noticed Michael becoming passive. Passive. That word hurt because it was true. Michael wasn't cruel. Cruel people are easier to understand. Passive people simply stand still while bad things happen around them. Thomas folded his hands together. Daniel loved your son deeply, but he worried Michael lacked the strength to oppose Vanessa if conflict ever arose. My throat tightened painfully. I suddenly remembered dozens of tiny moments over the years. Vanessa choosing the vacation destinations. Vanessa deciding holiday schedules. Vanessa interrupting Michael mid-sentence, and him immediately changing direction. At the time, it looked like marriage compromise. Now I wasn't so sure. Thomas reached into the folder again. There's something else. My stomach dropped slightly. He handed me another document. An amendment. I scanned the page slowly. Then I froze. If coercion, manipulation, or emotional pressure is used against Evelyn Carter regarding property transfer, I stopped reading. My pulse began pounding. What is this? Thomas looked directly at me. Daniel added a protection clause. I lifted my eyes toward him. If anyone attempts to pressure you into surrendering ownership rights, Thomas said quietly, they immediately forfeit their inheritance claim to the property. The room went completely silent. I stared at him in disbelief. You mean Michael? Yes. I could barely breathe for a moment. Daniel knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Enough to prepare for it. Enough to leave warnings hidden in drawers. Enough to protect me after he was gone. A terrible sadness washed over me then. Not because of the money. Because my husband had spent the final months of his life planning for the possibility that our own son might fail me. Thomas studied my face carefully. Evelyn, he said gently, has anyone directly asked you to leave the house yet? I thought about Vanessa standing in the kitchen. Maybe it's time you stopped acting like this is still your home. I thought about the retirement brochures, the missing photographs, the guest list without my family, the folder on the counter. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. They weren't planning this anymore. They had already started. I drove home from Thomas Reed's office in complete silence. No radio, no phone calls. Just the sound of rain hitting the windshield while my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. The city blurred past in gray streaks. Coffee shops, gas stations, people carrying grocery bags through parking lots. Normal life continuing like nothing had changed. Meanwhile, my husband had apparently spent the final months of his life quietly preparing for war inside our own family. I stopped at a red light and suddenly remembered something Daniel said to me years ago. We had been sitting on the back porch late one summer evening watching fireflies drift across the yard. Some people don't reveal who they are until they think the future belongs to them, he'd said. At the time, I thought he was talking about business. Now I wondered if he'd been talking about Vanessa. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the rain had slowed to a mist. Vanessa's SUV was already there. So was Michael's car. They'd gotten home early. For a moment, I stayed inside my car, staring at the house. 42 years of memories sat behind those windows. Birthday candles, Christmas mornings, arguments, laughter, Daniel carrying sleeping children upstairs after movie nights. And now every room felt like it contained something hidden beneath the surface. I finally stepped out and walked toward the front door. The moment I entered, I smelled roasted garlic and rosemary. Vanessa was cooking, or performing cooking, at least. She liked meals that looked beautiful but somehow tasted empty. The kitchen lights glowed warmly while soft jazz played from a speaker near the sink. Anyone walking in would have thought this was a happy home. That's the strange thing about manipulation. From the outside, it often looks elegant. Oh good, you're home, Vanessa said brightly when she saw me. Brightly, like the cold conversation from the previous night had never happened. Michael sat at the kitchen island typing on his laptop. He glanced up briefly. Hey Mom. Mom again. Interesting. I hung my coat carefully near the door. How was your day? Vanessa asked while stirring sauce in a pan. I looked at her for a moment. Her expression was calm, pleasant, controlled. I suddenly realized something. Vanessa wasn't worried that I knew. She was worried about how much I knew. It was productive, I answered softly. Her eyes flickered for half a second. Then the smile returned immediately. Well, dinner's almost ready. I nodded once and started toward the stairs. Actually, Vanessa said casually, can we all sit down together tonight? There are a few things we should probably discuss as a family. There it was. My chest stayed perfectly calm this time. Thomas's words had changed something inside me. No one can remove you from that home. No sale can happen while you're alive unless you approve it willingly. For the first time in weeks, I no longer felt confused. Pain, yes. Disappointment, absolutely. But confusion was gone. Of course, I said quietly. Vanessa smiled again. Too quickly. I went upstairs and changed clothes slowly. Then I sat on the edge of the bed staring at Daniel's photograph on the dresser. You knew, I whispered softly. The realization still hurt. Not because Daniel protected me. Because he'd needed to. I touched the frame lightly before heading downstairs again. Dinner was already plated when I returned. Vanessa had lit candles. Another performance. Michael looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes, and he barely touched his food. Good. At least this wasn't easy for him. For several minutes, nobody spoke about anything important. Weather, traffic, Emma's school fundraiser. Normal conversation floating awkwardly above something rotten underneath. Then Vanessa finally set down her fork. So, she said gently, Michael and I have been thinking about the future. I almost admired how calmly she said it. Like someone discussing vacation plans. Michael shifted uncomfortably beside her. Vanessa continued smoothly. This house is becoming a lot to manage. There it was again. The house. Never your home. Never Daniel's legacy. Just property. I took a small sip of water. I've managed it for years. Yes, but things change, Vanessa replied softly. Especially after losing someone. Michael stared at his plate. I watched him carefully. Still passive. Still silent. I suddenly realized silence can become betrayal if maintained long enough. Vanessa folded her hands together politely. We've been researching communities that might offer more support. Activities. Medical access. Social opportunities. Retirement communities. She made them sound like cruise resorts. I nodded slowly as though considering it seriously. And where would you and Michael live? Their eyes lifted toward me at the same time. Interesting. Vanessa recovered first. Well, she smiled carefully. This house would obviously stay in the family. Obviously. I almost smiled myself. The confidence in her voice told me something important. She truly believed this was already decided. Michael finally spoke quietly. We just want what's easiest for everybody. Easiest. Another soft word people use before taking something that doesn't belong to them. I looked directly at my son. When your father died, I said calmly. Did you promise Vanessa you'd sell this house? Michael's face changed immediately. No, too fast. Vanessa touched his arm. Lightly before answering for him. Nobody promised anything, Evelyn. Not Mom anymore. Now Evelyn again. Interesting how names change depending on control. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Then why have you already spoken to a realtor? The room went still. Michael looked sharply toward Vanessa. Vanessa's expression barely moved. But barely was enough. How did you know that? Michael asked. I ignored the question. You also toured retirement communities. Vanessa's voice cooled noticeably. You went through our paperwork? Our paperwork. Inside my kitchen. Inside my home. I folded my napkin carefully. You left it open on the counter. Michael rubbed his forehead hard. Vanessa straightened in her chair. You weren't supposed to see those yet. Yet. That single word told me everything. Not discussing possibilities. Planning transition. Preparing removal. I looked at both of them quietly. And suddenly I saw the entire situation clearly for the first time. Vanessa wasn't improvising. This had been building slowly for months. The missing photographs. The erased traditions. The changed passwords. The Thanksgiving board. Even the way she answered questions for Michael. She hadn't been redecorating the house. She'd been psychologically removing me from it before attempting to physically remove me too. Michael finally looked at me directly. We were going to talk to you after the holidays. I held his gaze. Talk to me, I said softly. Not talk with me. Talk to me. Like a decision had already been made somewhere else. Michael's eyes dropped again. And in that exact moment, I realized something even more painful than betrayal itself. My son already knew what his wife was doing. He just lacked the courage to stop her. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was shocked anymore. Shock had already passed. What remained was something quieter. A kind of painful clarity. Around 2 in the morning, I found myself sitting beside the bedroom window wrapped in Daniel's old cardigan, staring out at the backyard. The porch light cast long shadows across the grass. Daniel built that deck himself one summer after Michael graduated high school. He spent 3 weekends measuring. Boards twice because he was terrified of getting the angles wrong. I could still picture him standing there shirtless in the July heat, laughing when I sprayed him accidentally with the garden hose. 42 years. You don't build 42 years inside a house. You bury pieces of yourself there. That was why Vanessa would never truly understand what she was trying to take from me. To her, it was square footage. To me, it was a life. The next morning, I made a decision. I stopped reacting. That was the moment everything changed. Manipulative people expect emotion. Tears. Arguments. Defensiveness. What they don't expect is silence. Especially calm silence. I went downstairs around 7. Vanessa was already in the kitchen scrolling through recipes on her tablet. "Morning," she said carefully, watching me more closely than usual. "Good morning." I poured myself coffee without asking whether anyone wanted any. Michael entered a few minutes later looking exhausted again. Nobody mentioned the conversation from dinner. Interesting. That told me they were waiting, studying, trying to figure out how much I knew. I sat at the kitchen island eating toast quietly while Vanessa packed Emma's lunchbox. At one point she glanced toward me. "You feeling okay today?" I almost smiled. Concern had suddenly returned. Not real concern. Strategic concern. "I slept fine," I answered. Michael looked relieved by that response. Poor Michael. Even then, he still wanted to believe this situation could remain gentle. But some betrayals stop being gentle the moment planning begins. After they left for work, I cleaned the kitchen slowly. Then I began noticing things differently. Not emotionally. Practically. The file cabinet in the den had been moved slightly. One drawer no longer closed properly. Daniel's office key was missing from the ceramic bowl near the garage door. Tiny things. But once your eyes open, patterns become impossible to ignore. I walked into Daniel's old office and stood silently in the doorway. Vanessa rarely entered this room before his death. Now several shelves looked rearranged. The framed fishing photo of Daniel and Michael was turned backward. A storage box sat, partially open beside the desk. Someone had been searching through things. I crossed the room slowly and opened the box. Tax records, insurance documents, old mortgage papers, and near the bottom, copies. Copies of trust paperwork. My chest tightened immediately. Thomas had been right. They weren't wondering about ownership. They were actively investigating it. I carefully returned everything exactly as I found it. Then I walked upstairs and called Thomas again. He answered immediately. "Evelyn, I think they've been searching Daniel's office." A pause. Then his voice lowered. "Do not confront them." I wasn't planning to. "Good. And Evelyn?" "Yes. From this point forward, assume every conversation has a purpose behind it." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Every conversation has a purpose behind it. Suddenly the past few months looked completely different. Vanessa insisting I simplify my finances. Vanessa offering to organize my medication drawer. Vanessa suggesting she help with paperwork after the funeral. At the time it looked helpful. Now it looked like access. By afternoon, rain had started again. Gray weather seemed permanent lately. I was folding laundry in the upstairs hallway when Emma came running toward me holding a coloring book. "Grandma." Her little voice softened something inside me instantly. Emma was 8 years old with Daniel's eyes and Michael's stubborn chin. Unlike adults, children still move honestly through the world. "Can you help me color the horse?" Of course. We sat together on the guest room floor coloring quietly for almost 20 minutes. Then Emma asked the question that made my stomach drop. "Mommy says you might move soon." I kept my expression calm. "Oh." Emma nodded while choosing a brown crayon. She said old people like living with their friends. I looked down at the coloring book carefully before answering. "And what do you think?" Emma shrugged. "I like when you live here. Children say things simply. No manipulation. No strategy. Just truth." I touched her hair gently. "I like living here too." A few minutes later Vanessa appeared in the hallway. "There you are," she said brightly to Emma. "Homework time." Emma groaned dramatically and ran downstairs. Then Vanessa looked at me. For a second neither of us spoke. Finally she smiled politely. "You're very quiet today." I folded another towel slowly. "Am I?" "Yes." She leaned lightly against the doorway. Honestly, after last night, I expected more discussion. Discussion. Interesting choice of word. I looked up calmly. What exactly would we discuss? Her smile shifted slightly. The future. There it was again. Always the future. As if my present life had already expired. I placed the folded towel into the basket. "The future seems very important to you, Vanessa." She studied me carefully then. "Trying to read something." "Fear maybe." "Weakness." Panic. Instead, she found none. That unsettled her more than anger would have. You know, she said lightly, Michael worries about you being alone eventually. I nodded slowly. Eventually is doing a lot of work in that sentence. For the first time, her expression cracked slightly. Only slightly, but enough. She hadn't expected resistance hidden beneath calmness. Most people mistake quiet older women for powerless women. That's their first mistake. Vanessa straightened. We're only trying to help. I know. My calmness frustrated her now. I could see it. Manipulative people prefer emotional reactions because emotions create openings. Calm people close doors. That evening, Michael came into my room after dinner. He stood awkwardly near the dresser holding a mug of tea. An old habit. Whenever I was sick growing up, he used to bring me tea exactly like this. For a brief second, I saw the boy he used to be again. I made chamomile, he said quietly. Thank you. He handed me the mug and sat carefully in the chair near the window. The silence between us felt heavy. Finally he spoke. Mom, Vanessa means well. I stared into the tea. There it was. Not denial. Not defense. Just surrender disguised as explanation. Do you? I asked softly. He frowned. Do I what? Mean well. Michael looked wounded by the question. Good. Some questions should wound. I'm trying to do the right thing. I lifted my eyes toward him. For who? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That silence answered more honestly than words ever could. And in that moment, I realized something deeply sad. My son was no longer choosing between his wife and his mother. He had already chosen. He simply hoped I would make his choice feel less ugly. 3 days before Thanksgiving, Vanessa started pretending to be kind again. That was how I knew something important was coming. Manipulative people rarely stay cold for too long. Not when they still need cooperation. That Tuesday morning, I walked downstairs and found fresh flowers on the kitchen counter. White lilies. My favorites. Vanessa looked up from her phone and smiled warmly. I picked them up for you. For me. Interesting. I thanked her politely and poured myself coffee. Michael was already gone for work, which meant this performance was carefully timed. Vanessa watched me over the rim of her teacup. You seem better lately, she said casually. Do I? Yes. Calmer. I stirred cream into my coffee slowly. Grief changes shape eventually. That's true, she replied softly. But neither of us was talking about grief anymore. Not really. She walked toward the refrigerator and pulled out a folder. My pulse stayed perfectly steady. There are a few things Michael and I wanted to go over with you before the holidays, she said. There it was. I took a sip of coffee without answering immediately. Vanessa sat across from me at the kitchen island and opened the folder carefully. Charts. Numbers. Brochures. Retirement communities again. One had photographs of elderly couples gardening beside a lake. Another advertised luxury assisted living with resort-style amenities. Everything looked expensive and cheerful, like brochures designed to make abandonment appear compassionate. We found some really beautiful places, Vanessa said gently. Beautiful places. I almost admired her commitment to soft language. I glanced at one brochure. Monthly costs. Medical care. Transportation. Meal services. A schedule for bingo nights. My entire life reduced to pamphlets. Vanessa slid another paper toward me. This one has immediate availability. Immediate. Not someday. Not eventually. Now. I leaned back slightly. You've done a lot of research. She smiled modestly. We just want to be proactive. There was that word again. Proactive. As if removing me from my home was some kind of responsible adult planning. I folded my hands calmly. And what exactly happens to this house while I'm being proactive? Her eyes flickered briefly. Just once. Then the polished expression returned. Well, obviously Michael would handle everything here. Handle everything. Interesting how ownership kept slipping casually into her wording. I looked down at the brochures again. Then I asked quietly, have you already spoken to Emma about me moving out? That caught her off guard. Only for a second, but long enough. She overheard us talking. Vanessa answered carefully. Children always overhear more than adults realize. I closed the brochure slowly. When were you planning to ask me? Vanessa's expression tightened slightly. We are asking you. No, I said softly. You're presenting me with arrangements you already expect me to accept. The kitchen went very quiet. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Somewhere upstairs, the dryer buzzed. Vanessa crossed one leg over the other carefully. You make that sound unfair. I almost laughed at that. Unfair. Such a small word for something so ugly. I buried my husband 4 months ago, I said calmly. And already you're researching where to place me. Her eyes hardened slightly then. Finally, a glimpse beneath the performance. We're trying to think long-term. No, I replied quietly. You're trying to speed up a timeline. For the first time since Daniel died, Vanessa looked genuinely unsettled around me. Because I was no longer confused. And manipulative people lose power the moment clarity enters the room. She closed the folder carefully. I think you're misunderstanding our intentions. I understand them perfectly. Her jaw tightened. That tiny crack in composure told me more than any confession could. At that exact moment, the front door opened. Michael walked in early carrying grocery bags. The second he sensed tension, his shoulders visibly dropped. Like a tired man arriving at a fire he hoped somebody else had already extinguished. What's going on? He asked carefully. Vanessa answered before I could. We were discussing future plans. Future plans. Again. Michael set the groceries down slowly. Mom, I looked directly at him. Did you know Emma already thinks I'm moving out? His face changed immediately. He turned toward Vanessa. You told her? She overheard us. Michael rubbed his forehead hard. You shouldn't have discussed this around her. Interesting. Not you shouldn't be doing this. Just you handled it poorly. Even now, his problem wasn't the betrayal. It was the discomfort surrounding it. I stood slowly and carried my coffee mug to the sink. Behind me, I could feel both of them watching carefully. Then Michael spoke again. Mom, maybe we should all sit down tonight and really talk through everything. I rinsed the mug carefully before answering. I'd like that. Vanessa looked surprised by how easily I agreed. Good. Let her underestimate me. That evening, the atmosphere during dinner felt painfully artificial. Michael tried too hard to sound normal. Vanessa smiled too often. Even Emma sensed something was wrong. Children always do. Halfway through dinner, Emma quietly asked, Grandma, are you leaving because of me? The entire table froze. Vanessa reacted first. Of course not, sweetheart. But Emma looked at me, not her mother. I set down my fork gently. I'm not going anywhere tonight. Not tonight. Michael stared at me for a second after I said it. I think part of him heard the deeper meaning hidden inside those words. After dinner, Emma went upstairs to shower while the three of us remained in the kitchen. Vanessa brought out the folder again. No more pretending now. No more flowers. No more soft performance. Just business. Michael cleared his throat awkwardly. We know this is emotional. Emotional. Interesting how people label pain emotional when they want to minimize it. Vanessa slid several papers toward me. These are preliminary documents, she explained smoothly. Nothing official yet. I looked down. Temporary residency agreements. Medical release forms. Consultation appointments. They had planned everything. Every detail. Without me. A strange calm settled over me then. Not because I wasn't hurt. Because the truth finally stood completely exposed. There was something freeing about that. No more second-guessing. No more wondering. My son and his wife had already built a future in their minds that no longer included me living in my own home. Michael spoke softly. We really think this would be best. Best for who? But I didn't ask. Because suddenly I understood something important. They expected resistance. Tears. Arguments. Begging. What they didn't expect was patience. I lifted the top paper slowly. Then I smiled. A small, tired smile. I'll think about it. Both of them looked visibly relieved. Too relieved. Vanessa reached across the table and touched my hand. The gesture almost felt human until I remembered why she was doing it. Thank you for being reasonable, she said softly. Reasonable. That word nearly broke my heart. Because when women reach a certain age, people stop asking what they want. They only ask whether they'll cooperate. I folded the documents neatly. I'm very tired tonight, I said. I think I'll go upstairs. Michael stood halfway as if wanting to hug me. But he didn't. And somehow that hurt more than anything else. I climbed the stairs slowly with the folder in my hands. Once inside my bedroom, I locked the door. Then I placed the papers carefully on the bed beside Daniel's photograph. For several long seconds, I simply stared at them. Legal forms. Signatures. Transfer discussions. A roadmap for removing me politely. Then I opened my nightstand drawer and pulled out Thomas Reed's business card. I looked at it quietly. And for the first time since this all began, I finally stopped hoping my family would come back to me on their own. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and gray. The kind of November morning Daniel used to love. He always woke up before everyone else on Thanksgiving. By 6 a.m., The kitchen would already smell like coffee and butter while old jazz music played softly through the house. For years, that day belonged to us. Not because of the food, because of the feeling, warmth, noise, family moving through rooms without needing permission. But this year the house felt carefully staged, like a hotel, preparing for guests instead of a home preparing for family. I came downstairs around 7 and found Vanessa already decorating the dining table with gold napkin rings and white candles. Everything looked beautiful and completely lifeless. She glanced up when she saw me. "Morning," she said politely. Not warmly, not coldly either, just carefully. Michael entered a few minutes later carrying folding chairs from the garage. His eyes looked tired again. He barely slept these days. Guilt has a way of exhausting people even when they refuse to name it. "Nancy and Rick will be here around noon," Vanessa said while adjusting silverware. "My sister's bringing pies. Her family, her guests, her Thanksgiving." I stood quietly near the counter for a moment. Then I noticed something missing. My sweet potato casserole dish. The old white ceramic one with tiny blue flowers painted along the sides. Daniel bought it for me during our second year of marriage. Every Thanksgiving for 40 years, that dish sat in the center of the table. Now it was gone. "I couldn't find your casserole dish," Vanessa said casually without looking up. "I donated some older kitchen stuff last week." For a second, I truly couldn't speak. Not because of the dish itself, because she donated pieces of my life while I was still living inside the house. Michael looked uncomfortable immediately. "You donated it?" Vanessa finally glanced at him. It was chipped. I stared at the dining room table. Then I smiled faintly. "It's all right." And strangely enough, I meant it. Because by then, something inside me had already changed. You stop fighting for respect once you realize someone benefits from your humiliation. That morning, around 10:30, I called Thomas Reed. Not secretly, not dramatically. I simply stepped onto the back porch while Vanessa arranged flowers inside. "Happy Thanksgiving," Thomas answered. "You too." A short pause. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. I looked through the window into the dining room. Vanessa directing everything. Michael carrying trays silently. Emma coloring place cards at the counter. And suddenly I felt incredibly calm. "Yes," I answered. By noon, the house filled. With people. Vanessa's parents arrived first. Then her sister and brother-in-law. Neighbors. Friends. Laughter echoed through rooms that no longer felt familiar to me. Several people hugged me politely. "I'm so glad you're doing better. You look wonderful. How are you holding up?" Funny how people ask grieving women questions they don't actually want answered. I smiled politely through all of it. Years of motherhood teach women how to survive while bleeding internally. Around 2 o'clock, everyone gathered around the dining table. 23 people. Exactly the number written on Vanessa's list. I noticed there still wasn't a single person from my side of the family there. Not Grace. Not my cousin Helen. Nobody connected to Daniel anymore either. It struck me then. Vanessa hadn't just been removing me. She'd been removing his memory too. Dinner began beautifully. Turkey, wine, laughter, stories. Anyone watching from outside would have thought we were a perfect family. Then Vanessa stood holding her wine glass. "I just want to say how thankful I am that we've all come together during such a difficult year." Everyone nodded softly. She placed one hand lightly on Michael's shoulder. "And I think Daniel would be happy knowing we're moving forward together as a family." Moving forward. There it was again. Always forward. Never honoring what already existed. Michael forced a small smile. Then Vanessa looked toward me. "And Evelyn," she added sweetly. "We're all committed to making sure your next chapter is comfortable and peaceful." The room went quiet. Subtle enough that some guests probably missed it. But not all of them. I saw confusion flicker across a few faces. Next chapter. Interesting phrase to use publicly. I placed my napkin carefully beside my plate. Then I stood up slowly. Every eye in the room followed me. Vanessa looked slightly nervous now. "Good." I folded my hands calmly in front of me. "You're right about one thing," I said softly. Daniel cared deeply about family. Michael lowered his eyes immediately. I continued. He spent his entire life protecting this home, protecting the people inside it. The room stayed completely silent. Even Emma stopped eating. Then the doorbell rang. Vanessa blinked in surprise. "We're not expecting anyone else." I looked toward the hallway. "Yes," I said quietly. "I am." Michael's face changed instantly. He knew. Vanessa looked confused as Michael stood quickly from his chair. But before anyone could speak, Thomas Reed entered the dining room carrying a leather briefcase. The entire atmosphere shifted immediately. Vanessa's smile disappeared. Thomas nodded politely toward the guests. Sorry for interrupting. Then he looked at me. Mrs. Carter. Not Evelyn. Mrs. Carter. The room suddenly felt very still. Vanessa stood slowly. What is this? Thomas set the briefcase gently on the table. Daniel Carter requested that certain documents be formally reviewed if discussions regarding Mrs. Carter's residency or property transfer ever arose. Michael went pale. Actually pale. Vanessa looked sharply toward him. You knew about this? Michael didn't answer. That silence told her enough. Thomas calmly removed several papers from the briefcase. Then he spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. 3 years ago, Daniel Carter placed this property into an irrevocable protected trust granting Evelyn Carter permanent lifetime residential rights. Vanessa's expression completely froze. Thomas continued. Furthermore, the trust contains a coercion clause. Now several guests looked openly uncomfortable. Thomas adjusted his glasses. Any attempt to pressure, manipulate, or emotionally influence Evelyn Carter into surrendering her rights to the property results in immediate forfeiture of inheritance claims connected to the home. The room went dead silent. I looked at Michael. He looked shattered. Not angry, not defensive, just broken open by reality. Vanessa recovered first. This is ridiculous, she snapped. We were trying to help her. Thomas remained perfectly calm. The legal definition of help becomes complicated when relocation paperwork and property consultations are initiated without informed consent. Vanessa's face flushed red. You went through our private documents? I finally spoke. You left them on my kitchen counter. My kitchen, not the house, not the property. My kitchen. For the first time in months, Vanessa had no response ready. Michael rubbed both hands across his face. Oh my God, he whispered. And suddenly I realized something. He truly never believed this moment would happen. Passive people often mistake silence for permission. Thomas closed the folder carefully. Daniel anticipated potential pressure after his death, he said quietly. His instructions were very clear. The mention of Daniel's name broke something inside me then. Not painfully, almost peacefully. Because in that moment, I understood the truth. My husband had seen me clearly all the way to the end. Even after death, he protected me. Tears finally filled Michael's eyes. Mom, I looked at him calmly. And for the first time since Daniel died, I stopped seeing the little boy he used to be. I only saw the man he had chosen to become. You stopped protecting this family a long time ago, I said softly. Michael looked like he'd been struck. Vanessa opened her mouth again, probably searching for another argument. But nobody at the table was listening to her anymore. Not after the truth stood naked in the middle of the room. I picked up my wine glass slowly. Then I looked around the table one final time. At my age, I said quietly, you learned something important. No one moved. A home stops being a home the moment love becomes negotiation. Complete silence. Then I turned toward Emma and smiled gently. Finish your pie, sweetheart. And after that, I walked upstairs calmly while 23 people sat speechless inside the house my husband built for me.